The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the world first felt the tremors of its imminent collapse. In the heart of America, cities that had once been bustling hubs of life were now on the brink of destruction. News outlets blared warnings of a new virus, but it was too late. The disease spread with a ferocity unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. In mere days, entire populations were reduced to hordes of ravenous undead, and the world as people knew it was no more. In the early days, no one truly understood what was happening. Was it a mutation of an old virus? A biological weapon? The world was left to guess. But when the dead began to rise, clawing their way out of graves and attacking anything with a heartbeat, the true horror set in. The government scrambled, trying to control the situation, but it was already too far gone. With every passing day, the streets became more dangerous, the world more chaotic. At the edge of a small, overrun town in Nebraska, a group of survivors huddled together, preparing for what they knew would be their last stand. Among them was Sarah, a former nurse, who had lost her entire family to the plague. Beside her stood Liam, a young soldier whose platoon had been wiped out during an early attempt to secure a nearby military base. Their makeshift camp was in a rundown farmhouse, and their only defense was a handful of firearms, makeshift weapons, and their wits. "How long do you think we can last?" Liam asked, his voice thick with exhaustion. The walls of the farmhouse had already been breached once before, and they had barely managed to fight off the attack. Every day, the zombies get closer. Sarah stared out the window, watching the empty fields beyond. The wind had died down, and in the eerie silence, the occasional shuffle of undead feet could be heard. The shadows of the past few days weighed heavily on her. She had seen what the virus did to people, how it twisted them into something unrecognizable. The infected were not just mindless creatures. They were once human, just like her. "We hold out as long as we can," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But we need to plan for the worst. We have to get to the safe zone in the mountains. That's where they're saying the government's final stand is going to happen. If we don't make it there, we don't survive." Liam nodded grimly, his hands clenching the rifle that had been passed down from his father. He knew what was at stake, but he couldn't help but wonder if the safe zone was just a myth. No one had come to their aid, and communication had been cut off for weeks. Still, it was their only hope. Suddenly, the sound of distant groaning echoed from the other side of the farmhouse. It was the unmistakable noise of the undead, a chilling, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She motioned for Liam to stay quiet, and together they crept to the back window. What they saw made their blood run cold. A group of zombies was stumbling toward the farmhouse, their eyes vacant, their skin a grotesque mix of decay and blood. The horde was much larger than the ones they had faced before, and their movements were more coordinated. It was clear that the infection was evolving. The dead were learning, adapting. "We need to move," Sarah whispered urgently. "Now." But just as she turned to gather their supplies, a crash sounded from the front of the house. The door had been forced open. The zombies had breached the perimeter. Panic surged through Sarah as she grabbed her medical kit and motioned for the others to follow her. The survivors had to get out, but there was no clear way out of the farmhouse without running straight into the oncoming horde. Their only option was the old cellar at the back of the house. "Down the stairs, quick," Sarah commanded, leading the way. The cellar was dark and damp, the air thick with mildew and rot. But it was their only chance. As the last survivor descended the stairs, Liam slammed the cellar door shut behind them. The sound of the undead scraping against the walls above was deafening. The survivors huddled together, each holding their breath as they listened to the hellish sounds above. The nightmarish reality had finally set in. They were trapped. For the first time since the outbreak, Sarah allowed herself a moment of fear. It was impossible to ignore the dread that gripped her heart. How long could they survive in this dark, confined space? How long before the zombies figured out how to get to them? In the silence of the cellar, with the heavy, slow breaths of the group filling the air, it was clear. The fight for survival had only just begun. The hours in the dark cellar felt like days. The only sound that could be heard was the occasional creak of wood from above and the distant, echoing groans of the undead. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts churning with the weight of their situation. They couldn't stay in the cellar forever. As long as they were trapped in this tiny, confined space, they were easy prey. The question was, where could they go? By the time the sun began to set, casting an eerie orange glow through the cracks in the cellar door, Sarah had made up her mind. They had to leave. The horde outside might have moved on by now, but the longer they waited, the more likely they were to be found again. It was a risk, but it was a risk they had to take. "Liam," Sarah whispered, leaning over to him. His face was pale, and his eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but he had been a soldier before all this, and she knew he could keep it together. "We're leaving. We're going to head for the mountains, toward the safe zone." Liam looked up at her, his expression torn. "I don't know if we'll make it. The roads are crawling with infected. They've only gotten worse. If we're seen, we'll be overrun in minutes." "We've survived this long," she said, her voice resolute. "We'll survive this too. We stick to the back roads. We move fast, keep our heads down, and we don't stop unless we absolutely have to." The rest of the survivors, exhausted and scared, nodded in reluctant agreement. Each of them knew what was at stake, but there was a fire in their hearts that hadn't been extinguished. They had lost everything, but they weren't going to lose each other. The group emerged from the cellar, their eyes squinting as they adjusted to the dimming light. Sarah signaled for them to stay low, moving cautiously toward the back gate of the farmhouse. The wind was picking up, rustling the dry grass and sending a chill through the air. The stench of death lingered, thick and oppressive. A few minutes later, they were on the move. They kept to the shadows, using the thick woods surrounding the farm to mask their movement. Their goal was to head northeast, to a mountain range that had been rumored to house the last of the government's efforts to fight the plague. The world had grown so silent, so empty. The constant hum of technology, of life, had vanished. Now it was just the sound of wind and the occasional distant scream of an infected. After hours of travel, they reached a small clearing near a winding road. The moon was full now, casting an eerie light over the land. The air was still, too still. No wind. No animals. Nothing. "We should take a break," Sarah suggested, her voice tinged with exhaustion. The group nodded in agreement, but as they settled down, the sense of unease only grew. Liam checked his rifle, while Sarah scanned the tree line, her heart hammering in her chest. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't until they had started walking again, when the first groan reached their ears, that Sarah realized the danger had found them. The sound came from the woods, low at first, then louder, growing into a horrible, collective moan. It was like the entire forest had come alive with the sounds of the dead. They weren't alone anymore. "Run," Liam yelled, pushing Sarah toward the road. But it was too late. A wave of infected poured out from the trees, stumbling and lurching in their direction. Their grotesque forms were barely visible in the dark, but the sickly green glow of their decaying skin and bloodshot eyes was unmistakable. It was a nightmare brought to life. The survivors ran. They didn't need to be told. It was a primal instinct now. Survive at all costs. The horde was closing in quickly. Their footsteps, heavy and erratic, seemed to reverberate in Sarah's ears. She could feel the cold breath of death on her neck. Every step she took felt like it might be her last. Her heart raced, her mind whirring with strategies and plans that would never work. Ahead, Liam stumbled and nearly fell, but Sarah grabbed his arm, pulling him forward with all her strength. The others were struggling too, their legs growing heavy with fatigue. The road stretched out before them, but it was too quiet, too empty. She knew that wasn't a good sign. Then it happened. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw something she didn't want to believe. Another group of zombies had emerged from the darkness ahead, cutting off their escape. They were surrounded. A cold realization hit her. This was it. They were trapped. Liam's voice broke through the panic, sharp and commanding. "Get to the trees. We'll make a stand there." Without thinking, Sarah followed his lead, dragging the others toward a narrow strip of woods on the edge of the road. But she knew, deep down, that it might already be too late. The fight for survival had just become even more desperate. The woods had become a labyrinth of shadows and screams, a place where hope withered under the weight of the undead's relentless march. Sarah's breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest as she sprinted through the trees, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of escape. But the more they ran, the more the realization set in. They were being herded. Every step took them deeper into the grasp of the undead, and there was no way out. Liam, still at the front of the group, swung his rifle around to fire again. The crack of gunfire echoed through the woods, followed by the sickening thud of a body hitting the ground. But no matter how many zombies they took down, there were always more. It was as if the forest itself was alive with the infected, each twisted corpse more dangerous than the last. Every shot felt like a desperate cry into the abyss. "We need to get to the road," Liam shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. "We can't fight them off here forever." Sarah nodded grimly, her hand gripping her rifle tightly. There was no arguing with him. Staying in the woods was a death sentence. They had to move. But as they pushed forward, the distance to the road seemed to stretch farther and farther. The trees closed in around them like a suffocating cage. Behind them, the undead were closing in faster now. Sarah could hear their sickening groans growing louder, more immediate. The group's pace faltered as exhaustion set in, their limbs heavy, their hearts weary. One by one, the survivors were falling behind, either too injured to keep up or too terrified to run. "Tom," Sarah shouted, turning to see the mechanic stumbling, his face pale, his movement slow. His leg was bleeding heavily from an earlier encounter with a zombie. He was done. Before she could reach him, another infected lunged from the bushes, its arms outstretched. Tom had no time to react before the undead creature was on him, sinking its rotting teeth into his flesh. His scream was cut short as more zombies poured out from the forest, swarming over him. "Tom, no!" Liam yelled, spinning around to fire, but the zombies were too many. Within moments, Tom was lost in the writhing mass, his body consumed by the relentless hunger of the undead. The horror of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. They were losing them. One by one, her friends, her last connection to the world she once knew, were being taken by the plague. The weight of it threatened to crush her, but there was no time to grieve. They had to keep moving. "Sarah, keep moving." Liam's voice snapped her back to the present. "We've got to make it to the road. Now." She tore her gaze away from Tom's fate, her heart breaking, and forced her feet to keep moving. She glanced at the others, who were struggling to stay ahead of the horde, and saw the terror in their eyes. They couldn't keep this up. They wouldn't survive much longer. They reached the edge of the woods, but it wasn't the escape they had hoped for. The road stretched out before them, empty and quiet, but the zombies were closing in from all sides. The survivors stopped, panic rising in their chests as they turned in every direction. There was no escape. Liam gritted his teeth, his face pale but determined. "We'll fight here," he said, raising his rifle. "We'll hold them off as long as we can. We can't stop now. Not when we're so close." Sarah knew he was right. This was their final stand. She took a deep breath, her hand steadying as she pulled out her last remaining rounds of ammunition. The others gathered close, forming a circle, each of them holding their weapons with grim resolve. The first wave of infected emerged from the trees. Their bloated, decaying forms stumbled forward, eyes glassy and vacant, drawn by the scent of living flesh. The survivors fired, taking down the first few, but for every zombie that fell, 2 more took its place. The horde just kept coming. Sarah's rifle cracked, the recoil jarring her shoulder as she picked off the nearest zombie. The others fired too, their shots echoing through the night, but the zombies were relentless. The survivors' ammunition was dwindling fast, their bodies growing more and more fatigued. Then, something unexpected happened. A loud roar pierced the air, followed by a low, rumbling growl that shook the ground beneath their feet. Sarah whipped around, her eyes wide with terror. A massive figure was emerging from the woods, a towering, grotesque creature that had once been human, but had been twisted by the virus into something much worse. Its skin was shredded and bloated, its eyes dark and wild, its teeth sharp like daggers. It was a new breed of zombie, larger, faster, and stronger than anything they had faced before. The massive undead lunged toward them with terrifying speed, and before anyone could react, it was on one of the survivors, its claws tearing into her. Her scream was quickly silenced as the creature dragged her into the horde. "This is it," Liam shouted, firing frantically at the beast. "We have to take it down." But the creature was like nothing they had ever seen. Its sheer size and strength made it nearly impossible to stop. Every shot that hit it seemed to do little more than slow it down, and it was charging straight for them, its hunger undeniable. The survivors scattered, their efforts to shoot the beast only slowing it for a moment. It was clear now, this was no ordinary fight. They had to do something drastic, something desperate. "Move. To the car," Liam barked, pointing to an old, abandoned vehicle further down the road. "We can use it to drive through the horde. We fight our way there, now." It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had left. As the massive creature roared again, the survivors began to move, darting between trees and firing at the zombies blocking their path. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt something stir deep inside her. A spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it out alive. The old, rusted car loomed in the distance, an abandoned relic of a time before the world fell into chaos. Its once shiny exterior had dulled, covered in dirt and debris, but it was their only shot at survival. Sarah's heart raced as they pushed forward, dodging the zombies that lurched in their path, their snarls filling the air. "We have to get to that car," Liam shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of growls and the crack of gunfire. His eyes were fixed on the vehicle, his gaze filled with determination. The massive creature that had appeared out of the woods was still charging at them, each step like an earthquake, its claws swiping through the air with terrifying speed. Every time it roared, the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Sarah's legs burned as she sprinted forward, her mind screaming for her to keep moving. The others were scattered around her, moving in coordinated chaos, as they fought off the undead and the monstrous creature that pursued them. They were running out of time, out of options. The car was closer now, only a few dozen yards away. But between them and it stood the growing wall of zombies, their hungry eyes fixed on the survivors as they drew nearer. One by one, the undead started closing in, their rotting hands reaching for the survivors, their growls reverberating through the night. Liam was the first to break through the last line of infected, his rifle raised high. He turned, firing rapidly at the advancing zombies, trying to clear a path. But it wasn't enough. For every one that fell, two more took its place. His gun clicked empty. "We're not going to make it," one of the survivors screamed, her voice cracking with fear. But Liam didn't slow down. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and pushed her forward, his eyes wild with a frantic, burning hope. "Keep moving. Get to the car." Sarah's breath hitched as she tore her gaze from the horde to the car. They were almost there. Almost. But just as she was about to reach the vehicle, the massive creature crashed into view, its grotesque form emerging from the trees with an earth-shaking thud. It was on them in an instant, its claws raking across the air, narrowly missing Sarah as she dove for cover. "Move! Move!" Liam shouted, now standing between the group and the monstrous zombie. He emptied his handgun into its chest, but it barely seemed to notice. The creature swiped at him with its jagged claws, forcing him to leap backward, barely avoiding the fatal blow. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The undead were closing in from all sides, the creature was still attacking, and the car, their last hope, was just within reach. The odds seemed insurmountable. Sarah turned to the others, her eyes filled with resolve. She could see the same fear mirrored in their faces, but she also saw the will to survive. They weren't done yet. She wasn't going to let them die here. "We make a run for it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the panic surging in her chest. "Liam, give us cover." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted toward the car, her legs burning from the effort. Behind her, the others followed, desperate and determined, but the horde was fast on their heels. Liam fired again, this time hitting the creature in the side, but it only momentarily slowed the beast. He dove toward the car, slamming his shoulder against the door to force it open. "We're getting out of here," Liam shouted, throwing open the car's door. But just as Sarah reached the door, one of the zombies grabbed her ankle, its cold, decayed fingers sinking into her flesh. She screamed, twisting to free herself, but the grip was strong. She kicked and struggled, but the infected creature only tightened its hold. "Sarah!" Liam shouted, his voice filled with panic. Without thinking, Sarah pulled her knife from her belt and plunged it into the zombie's hand, the blade sinking deep into its rotting flesh. The creature howled in pain, but refused to let go. Desperation surged in her as she kicked out again, using every ounce of strength she had left. Then, with a final, brutal yank, she pulled her foot free, stumbling backward into the safety of the car. "Get in," Liam yelled. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Sarah scrambled into the car, followed quickly by the rest of the survivors. The engine sputtered to life, and for a moment, it seemed like they might make it. But the horde was relentless, and the monstrous creature was still closing in. Liam gunned the engine, his hands shaking as he slammed the car into gear. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward, plowing into the mass of zombies that had gathered in front of them. The undead were thrown aside like ragdolls, but the massive creature was still charging. "Hold on," Liam yelled as he slammed the car into reverse, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws as it lunged toward them. He spun the wheel, driving the car forward again, this time aiming for the small gap between the zombies. The vehicle lurched again, but this time they made it through. The car shot forward into the open road, the sound of the horde's growls fading behind them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. The road stretched out before them, empty and desolate, but it was their way out. "Is everyone okay?" Liam asked, his voice shaky as he glanced over at Sarah. His face was pale, and sweat dripped from his brow, but his eyes were filled with a raw, unrelenting will to survive. Sarah nodded, her body trembling with exhaustion. The fight had been brutal. The cost had been high, but they were alive. They had survived. For now, anyway. The road ahead was uncertain, but as the car sped toward the mountains, toward the rumored safe zone, Sarah couldn't help but hold onto a glimmer of hope. The plague had ravaged the world, torn apart families, and left nothing but chaos and despair. But there were still pockets of humanity left. There was still a chance. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The end. For now.